It was 1969. I lived at Kagnu Station, a U.S. military base in Asmara, capital of what then was the northernmost province of Ethiopia, and now is Africa's newest independent country, Eritrea. It was the second of my 5 years in Asmara, and the first of 4 excavation seasons, during which I helped to unearth parts of a number of major ancient city sites. Ted Sullinger, a friend who taught Ethiopian history at the University of Maryland Extension on the base, invited me to join his class for a 4th of July weekend tour of several archaeological sites in Eritrea and neighboring Tigray province, some where I had been digging only weeks before, and others that I knew only from my studies. I eagerly accepted his request to share with the group what I had learned during the tour. The sub-Saharan drought, which soon would become an unforgettable disaster, was at an early stage. Eritrea's freedom struggle, which eventually won independence from Ethiopia, was active but little regarded by the American community. Officially, both Ethiopia and the U.S. dismissed the liberation forces as shifta, the local term for bandit or highwayman. Halfway around the world, Apollo 11 was being readied for its historic journey to Tranquility Base. Our convoy set out on Friday, the 4th of July, heading south on the main highway from Asmara to Addis Ababa. Our itinerary called for us to visit 2 important sites along this road, then turn west toward Aksum, capital of the ancient empire which evolved into Ethiopia, stop at sites along that road, and finally head back north on the 3rd leg of the triangle, returning to Asmara sometime Sunday evening. Apart from a couple of breakdowns, our first stop was Qohaito, a major link in the chain of cities in the trade route between Aksum and Adulis, its now extinct Red Sea port. Reached by a rugged track, Qohaito sits well east of the highway, on the edge of an escarpment that plunges toward the lowlands and the Red Sea coast. Now a desolate ruin in a sparsely populated section of Eritrea's highlands, it was a great city 2 millennia ago. The site is best known for its magnificent stone dam, which irrigated the city in its heyday. Kagnu Station personnel at that time had few travel restrictions, and the requisite travel request was a mere formality except for trips off the main roads. But Qohaito was not on the approved list and was considered somewhat dangerous, and Ted had to obtain specific permission for us to visit the site. There had been no significant excavation at Qohaito, but we explored and photographed those ruins which were visible, remnants of several palaces, churches, and other buildings, massive foundation walls, the occasional stone pillar, some standing plumb-bob straight, others leaning precariously or lying fallen and shattered among the rubble from the building's collapsed upper floors, and several tombs and crypts. The dam, which remained largely intact, still provided water for local villagers' cattle. At the edge of the escarpment, we marveled at the spectacular view. From this rugged, deeply scarred precipice, a sheer drop of several hundred feet ended in rubble-covered slopes, sliced by steep, twisted canyons leading toward the coast, fading from view in dense haze which rose from the parched lowlands. Stones dropped from the edge fell so far that we couldn't hear them strike the ground below. We broke out our refreshments from coolers in the vehicles and had a leisurely lunch near the edge of the escarpment. While we were preparing to pack up and head out for our next stop, our interpreter, a young Eritrean student who was a friend of Ted's, came and told us that some suspicious people were approaching. We were by this time surrounded by what appeared to be a small platoon of well-armed Eritrean Liberation Front troops closing on our position. Ted quietly urged everyone to keep cool and do nothing rash. However, fearing the mythical shifta, some ran to their vehicles and desperately hid money and jewelry in their luggage. Quickly the soldiers reached us. most armed with various antique rifles, while a few had much more modern automatic weapons. It didn't look as though they were paying us a social call. They rounded us up and moved us near the parked vehicles. Through our young interpreter, they told us to sit in the shade of the only large tree that stood anywhere nearby. Satisfied that we were all protected from the strong midday sun, their captain spoke to us through a lieutenant and our interpreter. He spoke in Tigray, the Semitic language of some lowland Eritrean peoples. His lieutenant translated into Tigrinya, the related language spoken by most Highlanders, which our interpreter converted to English. The captain introduced himself and his men as members of the ELF, showed us their flag and insignia, and asked if any of us had heard of them and what we knew about them. We all feigned ignorance, hoping to avoid further trouble. He then asked if any of us spoke Tigrinya. No one acknowledged that they did. I had just begun learning the language, but was nowhere near fluent. Next, he said that many Cagnu personnel were known to speak Arabic, and asked if any of us did. I looked around at the group, some of whom, like myself, were Arabic linguists. I was reasonably fluent, but had no idea why he wanted to identify Arabic speakers. I knew that the ELF were not Shifta, and that they were fierce enemies of the Imperial Ethiopian forces. Since the U.S. was allied with Ethiopia, and we were in country at the invitation of the imperial government, we might be considered enemies, and linguists perhaps might be seen as spies or worse. However, with youthful optimism and curiosity, and sensing no hostility, I raised my hand. Surprisingly, after a brief pause, Rudy Hansek, another member of the group, did so as well. He told me later that whatever happened, he couldn't bear to see me face it alone. Having made note of me and Rudy, the captain continued his briefing, explaining their struggle for independence from Ethiopia and what they expected to gain from winning that struggle, emphasizing that they considered us as friends and had detained us only to introduce themselves to us and make sure that we knew their side of the story. As time passed, the shaded area shifted beneath the tree, exposing some of us to the sun, and the captain would stop and have us shift so that everyone was again in the shade. Once finished with the briefing, the men were kept sitting under the tree, but the captain moved the women to one of the vehicles where he thought they would be more comfortable. Then he asked Ted, Rudy, and me to join him apart from the others, and asked if we had any weapons, which we didn't. Then he said that we should tell the people in charge of the vehicles, one at a time, to supervise a search of all luggage and other belongings. For the next hour or so, we moved from car to truck to jeep. Each owner was instructed to take out all bags, coolers, and other materials, lay them on the ground, and open them for inspection. The ELF soldiers touched nothing, but closely examined all that was revealed in the bags as we unpacked them, asking about unfamiliar items and what they were used for, occasionally taking notes about particular items of interest. They laughed uproariously when money and jewelry would tumble from among the underwear and shorts, snorting contemptuously that they weren't Shifta. Then, leaving that driver to repack, we would move on and repeat the process. When the inspection was finished, the captain and his lieutenant asked me, Ted, and Rudy to go to a more private place beyond some scrub. There he stated that among the belongings in the cars, 2 pairs of binoculars were seen, and asked if we would donate 1 pair to their cause. 1 pair, military issue, was obviously non-negotiable, but the owners of the other pair agreed to part with them. The lieutenant then wrote a short receipt in Tigrinya on a notebook page that had been stamped with the official seal of the ELF, stating, "Our dear brothers, on this day, having come to Qohaito, you provided us with help. To the greatest extent we give you thanks," and signed it, "From the Eritrean Liberation Front." The captain asked Ted to add an acknowledgement. Being careful to avoid any potential international complications, he simply replied, "We thank you for letting us go freely." They gave the receipt to Ted and kept a carbon copy in the notebook. We rejoined our group and then were told that we were free to go. With an apology for any discomfort or inconvenience, the ELF platoon then backed off some distance and waited while we quickly finished putting our things back in the vehicles and headed out toward the main road. We drove to San Afe, the next town on our route, and stopped for the night at the one hotel with a generator. However, by the time we got settled, the generator was shut off, leaving us in the dark. We spent that dark night in quiet reflection, grateful to have gotten off so easily. Our only losses were time in our tour schedule and one pair of binoculars. But on reflection, some of us realized that we had spent our Independence Day in the company of patriots in their own struggle for independence. To this day, I have retained a copy Ted gave me of the receipt for the binoculars, a simple, small document which reminds me vividly of an event like so many similar small events during those days some 200 years ago when our freedom was being forged. None of us could have known then that it would take them nearly 30 years and countless lives lost or devastated to achieve their goal.